Bitcoin is close to becoming worthless.
Let's go. Now, what's the Bitcoin?
Bitcoin's like rat poison.
Yeah. Oh,
The greatest scam in history.
let's get it.
Bitcoin will go to fucking zero.
Yeah.
Alright, you ungovernable misfits. I'm your host, Max. Everybody knows that Bitcoin is useless, worthless, and doomed to fail. But what if everyone's wrong? What if it's the system that is doomed to fail? Join me as I speak to some of the brightest people in the space and slither to the deepest, darkest depths of the Bitcoin rabbit hole. Welcome back, everyone. Today's guest is Max Tannahill. I've been wanting to get him on the show for some time. We lurk in a lot of the same Telegram groups and we have some friends in common. It was really cool to actually chat to him in person. It's always different on Telegram or things like that. I always sort of struggle to really get to know somebody by text, but yeah, I'm really glad I had him on. Really great conversation, and yeah, just a proper Bitcoiner, proper bloke, and I really hope you enjoy listening to it. Thank you to my new sponsors, CryptoCloaks.com. Really good to have you on board and sponsoring the show. For anyone who hasn't already checked out their website, go and have a look. They have all sorts on there. A particular favourite of mine is the block mitt. The block mitt helps you stamp in your seed words into washers or any sort of metal for backups. Econo Alchemist has done a really good walkthrough on this and it's worth checking out. I think you can do it for about $10 or $12 with A2 grade stainless steel, so it's very, very safe, and yeah, just a great option. Obviously also they do all of the node cases, a couple that I'm waiting for myself, and you can customize things. You can buy your own spools from there now, so they're doing all sorts of stuff and it is well worth checking out. Also a thank you to CoinFloor UK, who have been with me since almost the very beginning of this podcast. They're UK only. They do dollar cost averaging or pound cost averaging. They're a very good team. I really enjoyed working with them, and they are, I think, the only exchange out there that will actually show they're not rehypothecating your coins if you're holding them on there. Like I always say, don't hold your keys on there. Try not to use KYC if you can avoid it, but not everyone's going to listen, and if you are in the UK and you are going to use an exchange, you really need to make sure it's a good one. That's CoinFloor UK. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the show, and any questions, feel free to reach out. Hey Max, can you hear me?
Yeah, how are you? Hello, Max.
Really well, thank you. Sorry I was a couple of minutes late there. I was just grabbing myself a tea, feeling a bit under the weather today. All sorry for myself.
That's interesting. I don't know if I was a bit kind of that kind of feeling today. So hopefully we'll cheer each other up.
We will do. We will do.
Or fall into a chasm of despair at the world.
No, that's the normal every day. This is a little break from that.
Good stuff.
Yeah, no, it's good to chat to you. It's good to have you on. I have a feeling we have a lot that we're considering in the same way from what I've seen from previous discussions, and the sort of areas that you are lurking are similar to mine, and privacy is obviously something that you care deeply about, and you've got some interesting ideas around it. So yeah, was really looking forward to having you on, and great to have you on the show. So welcome.
Thank you very much. No, much appreciated. Good to chat finally.
Where are you joining me from today?
So still based out in Singapore. So I've been out here 12 years in total now. So obviously originally from East London, kind of Essex way, but been out here a while now. So yeah, it's about 10 p.m. here this time. So it's it's a kind of end of the day, but not too bad. And it's a public holiday tomorrow, so a bit more relaxed than I normally would be. So that's good.
Very nice. And do you miss London at all, or just glad to be out of it?
Yeah, I definitely miss it. Yeah, it's funny. There's like just certain aspects of it you miss. I think that kind of hit you on different days. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are times when I'm kind of glad to be out of it, and you can kind of see what happens on the news, especially with kind of all the lockdowns that have been happening. And Singapore has I think felt a bit more reasonable in some ways, although things have gone also to other extremes here. So you kind of go through. Sometimes the grass is greener on the other sside. But look, I definitely miss. I definitely miss kind of summer culture. Obviously, there's a fairly big expat community out here. But just I miss even like it doesn't, not that you think it's a particularly big place when you're there, but compared to living in a city state, you miss the ability to go out for a kind of drive and see other areas. I'd always, when I've grown up, I'd always stuck around London or East London. I only really had interest in the city. But kind of since I've been kind of gone back on holiday, gone and seen the West Country, been around a bit, now I'd love to kind of, get in a car and go out and drive around there. And of course, here we are stuck, kind of unable to travel anywhere really.
Yeah, it's an odd one. We're sort of looking at going travelling around the UK for the next year or so, and I don't know how possible it's going to be with everything that's happening at the moment. We're just sort of playing it by ear, but I wonder what it's like over there in terms of movement. Are you restricted in any way, or what's going on?
Oh, so I mean, like it's kind of, I think, we've got what's kind of typical that you see elsewhere, which is kind of some areas where things are kind of quite restricted, and then the rules feel very strangely applied elsewhere. So I mean, there's no kind of lockdown in terms of areas or anything like that. I mean, last year there was kind of restaurants etc. were kind of shut, so it was all kind of takeaway and all that, and that was a pretty kind of depressing time, obviously. But what's kind of been weird here is the social life has kind of died down quite significantly, and huge amount of working from home going on, and bars kind of close at 10:30, because obviously at 10:31 people start catching COVID. But like the major problem, I think, I mean, for a lot of people is that everyone's used to kind of being very well connected amongst a region. You can go to Thailand normally, whether it's a city trip like Bangkok, or you go somewhere like Hong Kong, where you get like a kind of quick beach holiday, or even like, it's only a few hours to go to Perth. And suddenly, we just can't do that now. And I think there is the possibility to go out and return, but without having to kind of do what they call a quarantine, 2 weeks or 3 weeks now locked up in a hotel. But the countries we're allowed to go to don't actually let us in unless we're residents or whatever. So that's kind of the problem we're in now. So it's just very much, once you can get out, you kind of end up being stuck and can't get back in, which is a bit of a problem if you've got a job here and you're living here and you've got other things you want to get done. So that's kind of really is. And Singapore's fine for living in, but I mean, there's not a huge amount to kind of see in the island or anything. So it's not like somewhere where you can go, right, I'm going to go and do the equivalent of like drive up to Lake District, or, go and see a castle kind of around Edinburgh, or, go and have a hike in the mountains out in Wales. We got like a couple of hills really, and it's the same temperature here as it is everywhere else. And it's always kind of humid and stuffy and so you don't really get an awful lot of variation. So I think people are getting on each other's nerves a bit, and there's a kind of bit of an undercurrent of frustration. And people can do with a break. But the other thing is like, there's a huge amount of the life here that carries on as per completely normal. So I mean, like the food halls here, where a lot of the locals eat, are completely packed. You don't need to wear masks in there when you're eating, so that's kind of acceptable. And complete kind of ram number of people, but for some reason that's kind of okay on the social distancing side. And then we've also got kind of fairly strict enforcement of wearing masks even outside, which is a bit nuts, obviously, you can imagine. So that's
outside as well.
Yeah, and that's been the case since like May last year. So I mean,
right,
so that's kind of, I think that's the thing that really gets me the most. And you're looking at like 99.99% compliance. I mean, I regularly walk outside without a mask, obviously, because it's sweaty and disgusting and you can't breathe. It's horrible. But I mean, you get some pretty glary looks. Yeah, so it's from that perspective, it's a bit odd, really. I mean, you go out and take a cycle ride, I can swim and all that, that's okay. But so from that perspective, it feels quite normal. But yeah, it's not all is right with things as well in other aspects.
It's like self-policing, isn't it? We kind of have the same here in terms of the citizens are doing the policing work for everyone. I mean, it's you have people who will kick up a fuss about all sorts of different things, and it's almost like the propaganda has managed to work its magic, and people are completely fallen for it. And so, if you are on that other side and you're not wearing the mask, or you're
Yeah.
doing things that you feel you should be allowed to freely, people can get quite funny about it. It's very odd.
Yeah, I mean, like Singaporeans themselves give themselves a bit of a hard time for being the type to do the self-policing and, the snitching and all that. But I mean, honestly, I don't think it's anything like even a majority. All you need is like a kind of, 5 to 10%. And already you're kind of, you're looking over your shoulder a bit, right? And, it can kind of lead to some, odd behavior. But I think the other thing as well is that it's particularly serious when you're not a citizen here, right? Because, and this is the other big change here, and where you feel your freedoms cut in a bit more is if you're in London or whatever. Like, I mean, I wouldn't mind, to the same extent breaking a law or whatever. You can mouth back to a police officer or whatever, and it's not too much of a big deal. Here, it's not even people are worried particularly about the fines, or even, if I reckon a lot of people be prepared to put up with a night in the jail cell to let off some steam. But the problem here is you lose your work permit and you'd be deported and out on the first flight kind of thing. So that puts in a fair degree of compliance, as you probably imagine.
Wow. And so how does all of what's go? Well, actually, first question is, can you hear me properly? Because it looks like there might be an issue with my mic and it's showing up as unknown, and it's done this
I can
before.
hear you absolutely fine. So as long as you can hear me, we're all good. Yeah,
we're all good. Okay, that's fine then. So the real question then is, has this shaped the way that you're thinking about things with what's going on around you? Obviously, you're already a privacy advocate. You are already thinking about this stuff, but has it adjusted the way that you're doing things, or making you sort of extra careful with the way that you're going through things?
Yeah, so no, definitely. So, I mean, so the other thing that I didn't really mention, which is actually probably the most egregious effect on everyone's kind of privacy and rights here, is aside from like the mask stuff and the enforcement of social distancing and the ability to, I mean, I can't remember the name of the law, but it'd be like something like a Public Health Act, which you could be in breach of if you breach these COVID regulations, right? So aside from that seriousness, we've had a few outbreaks or whatever of COVID. I mean, I don't quite know the details. I mean, for all we know, it could be just positives on a PCR test, right? But whatever the case is people see the data and they're reacting to it. And in Singapore, there's always been a long-term plan of moving towards what they call like a smart nation. And I think, as both of us have probably realised over the last few years, when anyone says anything like smart something, what they actually mean is surveillance something, and that's definitely happening here. So like now what we're looking at is like a tracking app. I think it's probably fairly similar to your NHS app, right, with Bluetooth tracking and all that for kind of contact tracing. But the crucial difference here is, I think it's a crucial difference is that it's also tied in with your national identifier, and we do have like an ID system, and it's far more comprehensive than the UK's. So cross-referencing that with, as you can probably imagine, stuff like phone record, SIM cards and things like that, where you also can't get hold of those SIM cards without giving out your actual national identifier. You've got a huge amount of kind of your movements are just completely tracked. I mean, heavy kind of camera surveillance, very similar to London there. So that's been pretty significant. But in terms of actually how I've changed my behaviour, I mean, a couple of things. Like, I think the other thing that's a sobering aspect here is that there's only so much you can do here, right? Because what we've seen here, and what I think a lot of us would have believed before, is look, if it always gets too bad, I can just get up and leave. And I think it's been a bit of a learning curve in terms of a few things on that. Like, one, it isn't just easy to get up and leave when you've got family and friends or whatever here and jobs. So you can't just do that. And secondly, we've seen pretty much a kind of comprehensive application of these rules to just varying degrees, not a huge amount, but as in not varying that much by jurisdiction. So whereas I think we all thought that we could, move to other countries if something got particularly bad or another, now we're actually looking going, well, I could go to the UK, but they're probably rolling out pretty much the same stuff. I mean, Israel and Singapore almost seem like test beds to the West in terms of the way the surveillance is working. So, I mean, really, it's just been a kind of a general journey for me anyway to reduce the amount of tech services, whatever I use, that I think are kind of exploiting me for my information, and where I'm not kind of paying for a service just through my own money, and it's actually my data I'm giving out. So I've accelerated some of that. I'm using cash far more than I used to. I'm avoiding places where there's stringent check-ins and things like that. And just basically, it's not even because I'm trying to be like anonymous. I mean, it gets quite dystopian and grinding to your day to kind of go in and checkpoint type thing, and you feel like cattle. So I actually kind of had to have like adapted in that respect, just for my own sanity. And I moved out. I was in like a kind of a 1-bed apartment close to the city. Moved out from the centre of town where things are a lot more of a kind of pressure cooker. It's still busy in Singapore. It's still kind of high density population, but like I'm now in a larger apartment, more space, and just trying to keep away from the crowds and people a lot more, which for a city boy like me was never what I thought I'd do.
Yeah, but I can understand that. You do feel like you are cattle. I've got the feeling here I'm going through a similar thing and disconnecting from as many old email addresses and phone numbers and anything that I can. I'm doing it at, I would guarantee, a much less technical level than what you are doing, but just I'm doing what I can because I do feel that I'm definitely the product, and I'm not sure what the final plan is here. But I'll give you an example. Is like I don't know how much time you used the services in the UK, but the NHS, I had I haven't had to use them very often. One time I needed them a few years ago, where mentally things were not good at all for me, and I was in quite a bad place, and I tried and tried and tried to get help. It took me 8 months to get an appointment with somebody to try and help me, to try and just like sit and try and sort some issues out. It took 8 months of constant nagging, like no one ever getting back to me, no one ever helping. Just, it was absolutely horrific. And then now they won't fucking leave me alone. All I get is phone calls and texts from my doctor's surgery. Come in, get the jab. Come in, get the jab. I'm thinking,
it's incredible, isn't it?
Fucking mental. Like, I was really unwell before. Now I'm fit and healthy. I do not need that shit. Stop calling me. But what's scary is, even though I'm quite like abrasive generally, I actually self-censored. Like, I did it today. I was like, they called me and I was thinking, I should just tell them, fuck off. I don't want your jab. I don't believe I need it. Just like, go away. Stop harassing me. But I didn't, because I thought, that'll go as a little mark against my name. I don't want to be I don't want to be dealing with the nightmare stuff, because not everything is necessarily as it should be in my life always. So I thought, no, I can't be dealing with that. So I just went, yeah, I don't have a car. Contact me later. It's just like, what am I doing?
It can catch you off guard, and it's where I think sometimes when you react instantly, right? Sometimes that's the truest reaction that you've got, and it gives you a bit of a glimpse into how you're thinking internally yourself. If that's the first thing you're doing, without the chance to kind of necessarily like think a bit more kind of, how am I going to play this? But that is it's a worrying kind of trend, isn't it? Really. Yeah, I mean, I dealt a bit with the NHS when I was in the UK. Nothing kind of on the on a kind of mental health or anything else, that kind of side, but just on physical, like injuries and some fairly serious surgery I had when I was younger, and that was fairly okay. But then I was also quite young and didn't really have anything to compare it to. But a big kind of shock for me to the system was when actually my first year in Singapore, I joined a football club here and got myself injured fairly quickly with a fairly serious tear on the ACL, and like I went to the hospital or whatever, and it's a very different approach here. And it's not, you don't treat these people like a charity. You're effectively a customer. So you go in and the doctor there was a very jovial, big kind of Indian guy that was a sports medicine guy. And he trained even in the NHS and been there, and kind of said to me with a big grin, oh, once I'd done my kind of quota at the NHS of operations for that month, no one did any more work. He said, but I can do this operation for you tonight if you want. And he actually had like this kind of mentality of he's going to, how many ops can I get done in this month, so I can earn more money. It was quite quite a shock as a Brit, because we have here, although it's kind of fairly heavy privatized system, it's not like in the US where you've got that kind of heavily litigious aspect and incredibly expensive healthcare. It's actually fairly reasonably priced. You can get insurance at a reasonable level, and they do work for you a bit better. I don't think there's kind of quite the level of support on the mental health side though at all here, but at least kind of on the physical, it's a big difference to the UK, and it kind of challenges a lot of those truths that you grow up with that they're very much kind of embedded in our culture with what we think is the way to do things, and the only way we think can work. And that I think it's very typical in the UK that we're taught to be very grateful of the NHS without really questioning, are we getting value for money on it?
Well, yeah, it's taught as if it's not value for money, it's literally free. Everyone's like, oh my God, the NHS is free. And do you know what free means? Like, that's not free. If you're paying taxes to have it, it's not free, is it? If the money's coming out of your pockets, it's not free. There is a cost to all of this. And I worked in the NHS for 7 years, running dental practice and Botox clinics, and part of the surgeries I ran was NHS. And the level of efficiency is so embarrassing, and the level of corruption is disgusting. I had dentists taking all of the details from everyone who had died recently, and then they were taking all their details and whacking them through as fulls and all this dental work, backdating it, claiming all that money through the NHS. And because the person's in the ground, no one's going to check it. They're not going to go and dig them up. And it was happening constantly, absolutely constantly. No one did anything about it. No one cared. And all these guys are turning up in, Ferraris and everything else, and they're NHS dentists coming to these dues, and they're all just laughing about it. And you just think, you fuckers, no one sees this corruption, and it must happen through every single part of the NHS.
I think the thing that's kind of become clearer to me as well, and especially in the last couple of years as well, and it's going to be especially apparent kind of from now on, given that there's been such a dramatic shift in the way things are done in the last kind of 18 months or so since COVID hit. But people do go according to incentives, and without a doubt, I don't want to go too much kind of onto vaccines and things like that, although I don't see a need for me to have myself. I mean, I wouldn't be, I don't think, for example, that the vaccines are all going to be horrendously dangerous or anything. And I think there's an awful lot of, campaigns, information that will look for anything to justify going against vaccines, and spread that. And as well, we see the opposite. Whereas anything that's positive towards it, just because it's a vaccine, it's from it's endorsed by the government, it must be fine. But I think what we've got to see is that there have been some very, very big incentives in the last 18 months to get a product to market, which this is all it is. It's just a product, and it is a market. Very quickly, there's a lot of shareholder value to answer to. Those incentives will produce results that are not what is kind of being advertised to people. At the moment, there's almost like a lot of countries are almost on the kind of psychological war footing. We're all in this together, do this for the kind of sake of the community. Even if you're not a risk group yourself, you take the vaccine because you won't then pass it on to someone else, regardless of kind of arguing over any of the medical validity of all of that. I think it's going to be quite clear that it doesn't have to be. I'm not saying all companies or whatever, but there will be things coming out of the woodwork because things are rushed, because of the incentives in place, because of trying to meet the procurement at a huge demand, that people haven't got what they think they bought. And it's it's always a way. It's not about what you necessarily want to kind of happen from the circumstances. It's what is actually people financially incentivized to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the propaganda arm is rife. I mean, it's like it's on every bus stop, it's everywhere, and it's got into the hearts and minds of the public, and that that's a win, really. Is I've had people literally say to me, "Oh, so what? If you didn't take the vaccine, and then you went home and saw your grandma and she died, how would you feel?" And I was like, "Well, sad, obviously. Like what?" I don't understand what the question is. And then it's like, did she have the vaccine? And they're like, well, let's say for argument's sake she didn't. I'm like, well, let's say for argument's sake she did, because they're giving vaccine to everyone of that age. So if that's the case, and then she has the vaccine and it doesn't protect her, then I still feel sad, but I wouldn't feel guilty. And it like goes around in circles in this weird kind of way where you'll try and end and just say, look, at the end of the day, surely I can choose what goes in and out of my body. Like, what? Surely that is a fundamental right, that you should be able to have freedom of movement and that you have sovereignty over your own body and speech. And try and take all of it, I just don't like that. But it doesn't resonate.
No, and I think as well is that I don't know how old you are, but when I look at kind of we hear about kind of killing grandma, right? I mean, I think to my own grandparents, and they're all passed now. Actually, one passed relatively recently, but kind of mentally wasn't really there. So as far as I think most of the family were concerned, she had already departed us. But I mean, my grandparents were from the wartime generation. And they were made of sterner stuff than generations now. But when my grandmother was in a home towards the end, of which she got visited extensively by all the family, and we kept in touch and all that, she also felt that she was also kind of quite her time had time had been done. She had happy, she had kids, happy kids. She had, proud of her grandchildren and all that. Her husband had passed a few years earlier. She wasn't interested in surviving at home for survival's sake. What she wanted was, how many years she had left, was to see her grandkids and to see family. And I think there's this huge assumption, and again, it all comes down to making choices for other people. Is that when we talk about protecting the vulnerable, it's being used as an excuse for tyranny at the moment, because some of these so-called vulnerable people don't necessarily want to be protected, and they could be very vulnerable, but they still want to live life with risks that they choose. And that's completely been walked all over. Essentially, I mean, I think we're sitting on a mental health crisis in multiple countries now in the world, with not just older people in homes, but single people, in cities, that the social life that they relied on, or the travel they relied on being able to do, is just something cut down. It's a huge cost. It's quite frightening.
Yeah, absolutely true. And like you said at the beginning, we always used to think, oh, well, we can just disappear to another country. That doesn't look like that's maybe so realistic now. So how are you looking at it in terms of, if we can't physically move, then I suppose we need to make sure that our digital world is as locked down and secure and private as we can, because there's only so much we can do in the physical world to protect ourselves. Do you have any sort of idea of the way things can change, and that we can sort of have a little bit of peace and a little bit of privacy, even if it is behind a keyboard?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is learning to kind of ignore a lot of the information, actually. And I think prior to this, there was often a lot of advice, right, to get off Facebook or get off Instagram and these large social media platforms. And obviously, we crave these media platforms as well, because they provide connections and all that. But I think there's a few things is that that we need to do. You need to really, I think now more than ever, it becomes clearer which ones are doing you psychologically any good and which ones you're getting any value out of. I think it should be easier nowadays to just get off like stuff like Facebook. I just don't think there's a good reason to do that. If you need to contact family through like video calls or voice calls, there are just a ton of tools that you can do all of that without needing to get someone just on the kind of super friendly live social media thing. I think the other thing as well is like one of the things I've tried to do as well is that whilst we may lament some of the kind of the lack of privacy that we get in some of these tools and all that, like we often face the difficulty of trying to move against stuff with a large network effect. Like WhatsApp recently changed their privacy policy, right? There's kind of quite a large push to go on to stuff like Signal or Telegram or kind of other things that are a little more protective of our privacy. Personally, one of the things I've done is just be far more ruthless with who I want to chat to. I think when you're physically in an office or physically in touch with certain people, I think we actually make more compromises with who we're prepared to spend the time with and deal with. And actually, these are not necessarily people that we do. So there's an advantage here with kind of with the digital world, is being able to actually have a little more choice there. I think the other thing as well is like a major factor here is, and I can't stress enough, is keeping a sense of humor. You like fundamentally, like we obviously don't want to go to these new platforms that we find that are more privacy respecting on our own, because obviously there's no one to chat to, and there is always a challenge of moving someone off there. I find personally the best way is not to go and tell people, come move to Signal, it's end-to-end encrypted, or it's got they're very respecting privacy, because most people don't care. And I actually think the best way is to relentlessly mock and show to other people how you're living a more free and more enjoyable life based on essentially different tools and different choices. When friends do come to you with frustration that that their Google account has been deleted or something like that, I've actually had friends kind of with a range of things, complain to me about I'm getting kind of adverts that are kind of coming through, that are like super invasive, and people are cluing up to it a bit more. And actually is to actually show them that you're not bothered and that you're not going to play by other people's rules, and you're not going to assume that everything is preordained and that you have to fit into these large kind of tools, and not to push anyone else into it, but just kind of almost like lead by example. I find that's kind of one of the best ways. But it's how can I say it can be jarring, because you can create this little world for yourself where you're speaking to people that are not kind of sucking up some of the propaganda that we're getting now, and then you then take a little walk to the mall or something, or the tube station or something like that, and then you start hearing the tannoys going with the kind of the slight dystopian mask up, because of the situation, the worsening situation. I mean, it's a supermarket, it's a mall, it is it's quite it is genuinely very dystopian nowadays in a lot of places. But I mean, it's don't lecture people. I think if someone is genuinely worried and feels anxious about getting a vaccine, then sure, go for it. But I think being at ease with risk, enjoying life where there's risk, I think that's actually a far more powerful message to give people.
Yeah, you're right, and the lecturing definitely doesn't work. I know that for sure, and I just don't bother anymore. I just spend the time, like you said. You can be more picky with who you spend time with, which is something that I've definitely done. Sort of cut down on a lot of the interactions that I know are just going to wind me up, because there's just no point. You just think, oh, I've got better stuff to do than just get wound up by this person. So that's definitely something that I've done. But network effects wise is very hard, because there are some people you want to keep in contact with, and it is hard to get them to switch. It's not exactly difficult to download Telegram or download something else and use that, but it does seem, I think it's because everything's in different sections. So like, you know, you're like, oh, where did someone message me? Was it Telegram? Was it
Oh,
Instagram? Was it? Do you know what I mean? It's like if there was one thing that put them all in one place, it would be a little bit easier. But yeah,
oh yeah, and also like the other thing that I found is that I think mentally you can actually stress yourself out a little with the online world, because actually if you get sucked into it a bit, you can actually you can expand that network by quite a large number of people. I mean, I get DM'd quite extensively, obviously, because I'm kind of like, present on Telegram groups. Obviously, we know each other through like the Bitcoin community, and then you kind of find yourself being pinged by people and direct message and tagged, and you get questions. You get people that are stuck, anxious about something. I've had people trying to, recover money. They want advice, all that. And you can actually find yourself getting to a point where you're actually quite overwhelmed, and you're actually trying to maintain. I think it kind of goes back to that Dunbar number. I think, is it? Have you heard that one?
yeah,
Which is like,
yeah,
how many people you can
150.
how many people keep track of it. I'm sure, like on a personal level, like online, I'm sure like I can give you a breakdown of probably about 500 people with a good explanation of who they are, what their personality is like, where they're located, and what kind of interactions I've had with them. And that's actually quite overwhelming. I don't know, and I know that people that not even in like my position, but people doing like very popular podcasts, or someone like a kind of Matt Odell or Livera or those people, like those guys have got like extensive reach with what they're going out. But I think they're getting hit up all the time on Telegram and Twitter and things like that. And you've also got you've got to be able to pull back from that as well, and kind of cut yourself off as well, and make sure you haven't just ignored the physical world, because it's overwhelming, and you can kind of find yourself a slave in that respect as well.
Yeah, that's too much. I've said that a few times about people like Matt Odell, who have a massive following, and they're sort of helping people with the technical stuff. I've reached out a few times. He's helped me with a few bits. He's always got back, and I've always thought, like, how the fuck do you do it? Like seriously. I mean, I have a podcast. It's tiny. I have like a very small group that seem to really enjoy it, and I have some good banter with them, and I enjoy that. But even that is hard to keep on top of. There's a lot when you're doing other stuff and you're still working and all of that. So someone like that, who's probably got 1,000 times, 100,000 times more people listening, how the fuck are they doing it? They must have like a little team of elves or something.
Yeah, not to mention, I'm sure also the inevitable disappointment that happens, and the abuse I'm sure they get at times as well. Like, I mean, so you don't even necessarily see that. So it's a tough one. But yeah, I mean, I've kind of, I suppose, like, I feel I've kind of pulled back off Twitter a bit. I think there's less value in that platform now anyway. I think it's particularly kind of just the kind of general crypto has become a bit more mainstream, a bit more kind of just, everyone's enjoying a bull market. Like a lot of it's just pretty cringe, and there's a lot of kind of positive self-reinforcement going on, and all that. And actually, I think personality-wise, I bloody love a bear market. I love the kind of solidarity in difficult circumstances. I think it brings out kind of harder characters and people that are a bit more robust. And also, I think that it sharpens people's skills a bit more in terms of thinking a bit more adversarially. I mean, when I first really got into Bitcoin, felt to me like a kind of quite a late comer, but I mean, really, like, I suppose,
what was that, 2009, wasn't it?
2015. Yeah, like, so yeah, I felt really like late to the party then. And of course, there was a lot happening around 2017, obviously, and that was a kind of very interesting time to see, because things were splitting off into factions a little more and all that. But I think kind of recently, like, it's people have rested on their laurels a bit, and especially what we kind of see now, it's a far more kind of there's this kind of savings narrative that's popped in. People are kind of treating it a little more, like a kind of investment, and it's it hasn't got kind of quite the kind of the anarchist libertarian edge that it had when I was first involved.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's, from that perspective, I think the communities that I want to involve myself in have found their own place now, and I think there's chat groups, whatever. There's a better medium for that, and there's also not the same chasing of stuff like retweets and likes and things like that. So you get a more kind of people less chasing clout. It's more about quality of chat, conversation, and actual trying to get things done.
Yeah, I like that. It is difficult with the sort of newcomers coming in and people who are not aligned in terms of sort of what they think this network can do. And I'm sort of somewhere in the middle because I have friends in both camps, and I sort of came in very much for the money and this is an investment and everything else. And now it's much, much more than that to me. I still understand that this is most probably going to be worth a lot more money, and I get that, and that that is exciting, that is helpful. It will probably change my life to some extent, give me a bit more freedom and a bit more time, which is that's fucking awesome. But at the same time, I very much worry about the sort of full KYCing of everyone getting really excited about institutional investment, and like all you ever hear is, oh, this company's got in, this company's got in. It's like, yeah, that is brilliant, and I am excited, but they're not gonna self custody. It's all KYC stuff. It's all going into the hands of these big corporations, and to me, the exciting bit is when I see plebs get their hands on something, like just a normal person who's just like, oh, do you know what? Fuck all this. I want to store my value in something else. I want a different network. I want, a completely different system than what I've got. And I don't know, there seems to be a lot of battle between these two groups, and there shouldn't be, really, because I just think it's more valuable if it's private. Like, if you don't care about anything, even if all you care about is number go up, then you should still see that, well, this isn't as useful and helpful, and not as many people are going to want this if it's all trackable. And so I don't understand why why people aren't getting that. It's a very weird thing to me.
I think it's a lot to do with not being able to see several steps ahead in the game. How can I put it? Is that I think it's like, in fairness to the people that are newer to the whole thing, you go in and you might have an idea, or you'll see a particular service, or a wallet, or whatever it is, or a new coin, or whatever, even, right? And you see something and it looks great, and then what you actually often find is there's kind of like the naysayer type in the corner saying, well, trouble with that is this. And I think one of the things that I've seen happen is that, like, how can I put it, is that it kind of comes back to even our earlier point about kind of the incentives mattering as well. Is that, if anything, if you kind of take a shortcut in any of this, and I think especially the case with Bitcoin at the moment, is that what can go wrong, will go wrong, and in quite a big way. And one of the things I've kind of been at pains to explain as well is just kind of like the journey that I've got, that I've gone through. I mean, I had, when I first got involved with Bitcoin, I mean, I was very much from a traditional financial services background. I'd seen, this is a kind of era of blockchain, not Bitcoin, and I was never convinced by that. I was still kind of politically interested in what Bitcoin could achieve and all that. But I was also wondering, like, well, maybe these cryptographic tools can have applications elsewhere. Would it work in, say, security settlement, things like that? And one of the things I looked at was doing even a custodial service at the time for allowing folk to use the Bitcoin network but hedge to alternate currencies. And long story short, but I had money on Bitfinex, and when they got hacked, I took like a 36% haircut along with all the other people that had money. And I'd been warned, about that being a risk. And you kind of don't think it's going to be a big deal until it happens, right? And I think kind of one of the things that we're seeing now, which is a far more subtle thing, but like one of the things we're seeing with Lightning, is that you've got this very interesting tool, and it's actually a very effective tool. But there's the way it's being sold, not necessarily even by the Lightning protocol developers. This is not to kind of point them out, but people that are just kind of tech orbiters, right? They're ones that just enjoy following and retweeting, and they're getting kind of excited by kind of new things coming out, right? But you got to look at like what does what problem is it really solving? And when you're building tools that aren't actually built with an adversarial nature right from the beginning, and if you're building something that's kind of custodial, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And like that's what I've seen just happen time and time again. You want to take a shortcut with like the wallets, or you want to take kind of personally identifiable information to make your job easier, then that's going to be the thing that's going to be the kind of the end of it here. And I think what we're going to see here, right, is that if you're going to try and like, we're only doing a bit of a KYC on a service or something like that, then you're going to find that Bitcoin product that you're launching starts resembling a lot like the traditional financial services that were there before, which then brings you back to the point of, so why are we doing Bitcoin again? And a lot of the time that comes back to, it's a new monetary policy, it's 21 million, it's a sound on that. But it's not valuable because there's only 21 million of them. It's valuable because you can do the censorship resistant transfer. That's still the core value proposition. So the moment that kind of disappears from it, then you're just left with like 21 million baseball cards that are virtual. So it's just not going to have the same value.
Yeah, I agree. And it also, if you say, oh, well, you only have 21 million coins. It's like, well, if you go back to a traditional type system and it's rehypothecated, then do you actually know that you have 21 million, or do you actually have a fractionally reserved system built on top of something that should be sound, but everyone's just having little IOU tokens passed around? Then what's the fucking point? Like it really annoys me, because there is a system that can actually create freedom, and it can make changes that are really profound, and people are fucking around with old ways of doing things and NFTs and all this bullshit. And it's like, I know it's hard, like it is hard to use the tools properly, but it's so worth it. And then you get this other sort of in between, which is like the maximalist ideals, which I only hold Bitcoin. It's the only thing I'm personally interested in, but I'm also open to the other things, like, if we can do atomic swaps, if we can have other layers, if we can do whatever. I don't care what it is. I just want to be able to have more privacy and use tools that are useful. And so, a lot of the arguments where people are pushing back about things like that, I just think you're sort of pushing in the wrong direction. It shouldn't be pushing against things that can give you more privacy and allow you to use this network. It should be against the KYC, and it should be against the sort of normie world, the suits all just like lurking into this, because it's not a place for them.
Yeah, I think it becomes clearer when you start using these things kind of in action, right? And I don't even mean just kind of doing it as a trial for kind of once off. I think I saw on Twitter recently, there was someone, fairly big account, that basically said they're super hyped about Lightning. Oh, going to get this rolled out amongst our kind of, our company. Absolutely super hyped about it. Mm-hmm. And actually, funnily enough, on just 2 days ago, I went and opened my first Lightning channel in about 6 months. So I have a LND node that basically never really gets used anymore. But I thought, while fees are low, I'm going to go and set it up. And I actually did it because someone had PM'd me with a tool that enabled you to switch Lightning direct into Monero using like an API off a quick kind of swap exchange. But it was actually like a no JavaScript browser. So it was a kind of front end or whatever. So I thought, okay, well, I'll give it a shot. I haven't got any Lightning channels, so I set it up. And it's kind of interesting because, like, in just the last couple of days, right, there's also been quite a good article written about all the kind of the privacy issues with Lightning as well. So it's kind of quite interesting because although some of what I saw in that article resonated with me, there's actually quite a few things that I didn't know, but also some things that I also felt that they didn't actually spend enough time on, but we can kind of come to that later. But yeah, so I kind of set up these channels, and set up a channel to do the payment. And overall, it's actually quite a hassle. One of the things that you kind of realize with Lightning is that if you just get demoed it, for example, it can look quite impressive. You can see potentially some of the wallets have got kind of quite a nice shiny UI. You can do a payment, and you can essentially show to someone, look, I've done a payment. It's only a few sats. It's really cheap, and it was instantaneous. And of course, we all know with Bitcoin is that average 10-minute block times quite slow. You've got the frustrations of dealing with a mempool. And you can obviously, we've all had periods when the fee rates can get quite high. So you're already basically saying to someone, hey, look, you've got something that actually just alleviates two of those issues there. And also there's some obfuscation with the amounts. So it's actually a great thing to kind of demo and give someone an impression that it solves a lot of the problems. But what I think is interesting is actually when you start using it to do something. And it can be as simple as trying to operate a shop and actually do it as a merchant, or even just as a retail individual, actually trying to use this stuff day to day. And then you find actually the real difficulty of using this stuff. And without going into kind of huge level of detail, but something like Lightning, just going to give you an example, is for a start, you're always coming from the main chain pretty much from the get-go. So it's not like you can kind of fully forget what it's like to deal with Bitcoin anyway, because you've got to move funds into a certain place and have it and be in a position anyway. So you've got to set stuff up anyway. So you're still not away from all the problems of dealing with Bitcoin as it is, because that's your starting point. But the other thing is that you've actually got to actually navigate opening channels. And then if you want to receive money, you've actually got to actually find someone to open the channel back up to you. So right from the get-go, you're actually in a world where you're actually asking permission. You've now got particular nodes where their quality of routing is being graded. It's kind of far more kind of centralized. But also the other aspect of Lightning is that the whole thing's, I think, one of the best explanations I saw was a bit like using an abacus and kind of switching beads from one side to another to kind of show what it's like to kind of pay amounts of money through a Lightning channel. But one of the things that I've personally found, right, is that being able to set up a channel, let's say between me and you, that sounds great. If you want to pay me some money, you pay, and we don't actually have to settle on chain. I want to pay you. But in real life, personally, I don't have anyone I deal with that I do that kind of payment mechanism with. I get paid by one entity, and then I go to maybe a supermarket, and I go to a bar, I go to a few restaurants, and they're all the people that I pay. So I've got multiple areas where my money flows out, and only one place where my money comes in, and then maybe I do save on a monthly basis. So you're already looking at this kind of idea that, you can maybe manage a few payments, but you're actually going to get to a point where all your channels end up with liquidity all on one side, and then you're going to have to go back through and rebalance them. Now, sure, you could obviously do a number of payments that more than you could with it being Bitcoin, but of course we also know that Bitcoin's highly volatile. People are actually managing how much money they're going to keep in Bitcoin potentially. They're managing FX rate movements and all that. So what you actually find is you've actually got quite a lot of management of that liquidity to do. Now, that's not something that people like me and you do or will do on a day-to-day basis. Sure, maybe some software tools will come up and solve those problems for us, but certainly not the case at the moment. But the kind of entities that do that are middlemen. And actually, that's kind of who I think is going to be the biggest benefit of something like Lightning. They're the people that use it. It's going to be someone like exchanges. Sure, at the moment, people are shilling alternative tools like Liquid or Wrapped Bitcoin or something like that, where you're kind of using a side chain or something like that. But actually, if you actually look at what Lightning is really useful for, it's useful for managing counterparty risk. And the way I see it is those are the type of entities that will adopt technology like that because it actually solves a problem that they're trying to do. Whereas when you start using these tools to do your kind of daily purchases and receive money, Lightning, for me anyway, for a personal perspective, falls flat in that respect. So that's where I found, I think, where you're seeing as well with the adoption in kind of grey, and I know kind of the Samurai team have pointed this out in darknet markets, where you're seeing useful alternate currencies like Monero. people are using those just because essentially it's actually more akin to how they operate on a day-to-day basis. So it's kind of, I think that's kind of what's interesting here is that no matter kind of what you start off with your initial opinion on what tool seems to be the right thing for the job, what's actually interesting is when you actually start really using it to achieve something, you very quickly end up with the right tool for the job just through naturally working with it.
And do you think the use of Monero on most darknet markets now is mainly because of privacy reasons, or is it also, do you think, because of fee pressure? Because I've owned Monero before years and years ago. I tried running a Monero daemon or whatever it was called, fucked it up, couldn't get it to work. Standard thing for me. And so I've never really used it, but a few friends do, and I'm sure they've said the fees are very low
Yeah,
for
so
sending.
there's been quite a lot of scaling work on that. So I mean, so I think I've been using Monero since about 2017. So I mean, I was always interested in it from the early days, just because of the kind of the privacy focus. And but for me back then, right, a lot of the criticisms of Monero were that like they were very large transactions. It was expensive even then. Actually, funny enough, the fees were actually relatively high. And you know, if I recall correctly, actually, because of the old kind of, I think what they called the range proofs, which were before the bulletproof upgrade in terms of the cryptography that was being done on chain. So, and then what I kind of noticed personally was that things improved quite significantly with the core development team, with the rapid changes they were putting out. And whereas Bitcoin was saying, understandably, a far more conservative project, and the guys on the Monero core team were putting more out. I think, though, usability wise, it wasn't just the fees. It's also is that on a usability perspective, it's, you know, like we didn't necessarily have all the tools that we have now in Bitcoin for privacy, and even now, there's actually still like so much more to do, really, to kind of to feel that you're doing what's required if you want to kind of maintain transactional privacy. But to put it this way is that, you know, people are used to having like an account number, right? And then to receive money out, and then to give that out, and then you just pay money. You don't have to think about how you're managing coins, and you don't have to think about labeling or anything like that. So I think the usability perspective of Monero is also significant there. You've got that reusable payment code, the address that you can give out that generates stealth addresses. So you don't have to worry about address reuse. You don't have to worry about where your coins are coming from. You don't have to worry about actually mixing. You don't have to apply thought processes too much to what you're doing there. And then when you pay someone, you know, you've got a relatively kind of fast feedback mechanism with shorter block times. You know, this is aside from all the other trade-offs that there are in Monero. So, you know, there's obviously a lot else. But yeah, I think that is going to definitely be on the increase. And, you know, clearly I've got no idea on price. This is not a prediction there, but I'm just talking about use. And I don't think it's just going to be on the darknet markets. I think it's going to be more common as well. Even what I've seen now, and it's not just in my own experience, but actually if you look at kind of some of the, even in kind of like gift card businesses and things like that, Monero's kind of gone higher on use in those type of businesses in terms of what people are willing to pay. I've seen it on my shop, and I've seen, you know, people more willing to use it, especially when there's like high fee environments or people that just don't have the capacity to do the work required on Bitcoin to maintain their transactions privately. So I think one of the things I said recently is, and I want to be careful the way I say this because it's got terrible connotations, but for me, it's become like a Bitcoin layer 2. And I'm not suggesting that it is a layer 2, because I think that's kind of an incredibly politically loaded term, because it's lots of claims to that as a layer, because it's, you know, it's obviously a freely floating token. You know, who knows about its monetary property strength and all that. But the point is that if you take it back as a user, which is how I think, if I don't mind dealing with something like Bitcoin moving larger amounts. And personally, I'm going to put more of my wealth in something like Bitcoin than I would Monero, because it's a more tried and tested. It doesn't have the same volatility. It's a more conservative protocol, just in terms of kind of monetary safety and the assurances that come from there. But in terms of like, if I'm going to do smaller payments, or I'm going to do payments where I expect a kind of great degree of privacy, it becomes a bit more like, and I dread to, a fee using the term. It's a bit like a kind of silver to gold in that respect, and that's got horrendous connotations with the scam that is Litecoin, which is just the laziest kind of fork of Bitcoin there is. Because I mean, that's the thing is, Monero isn't. It's a different code base, so it has, But I think that's what I find genuinely interesting is because I think there's I've never really been into the kind of what's called kind of maximalism, just because there's so many different trade-offs, right? You can think, certain things are kind of quite scammy or whatever, but for me anyway, is that if you're taking take a step back, if you're taking like Bitcoin, using like Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin Gold or something, if you just take Bitcoin and just a few parameters and mainly the mining algorithm, then pretty much the externality costs of maintaining that blockchain are effectively the same as Bitcoin, and that thing is destined to die. Really, like it's just going to fall apart. But if you've got something that's entirely like a different code base, and in case something like Monero, presently at the moment is ASIC resistant, you've actually got something that people can fairly permissionlessly in an egalitarian way actually get hold of some coins in a way that they can't do with something like Bitcoin. So how long that maintains, who knows? But the point is, at the moment, people will use that tool because it offers something that isn't being offered by Bitcoin at the moment. And I think for me, I find that interesting. And I'm also interested in stuff I can use right now, and tools that I can use right now to do what I do, because I'm not really that interested, much more than 6 months, a year to the future in terms of what potential developments there are, because I've been long enough in Bitcoin to hear of all sorts of promises and expectations of certain tools for them, when you actually see them in real life, actually turn out to be nothing quite what they were advertised as.
Like a blind date that goes wrong.
It very much so, yeah. I mean, and this is the other thing as well. I mean, there's some really great stuff in theory, right? But even if on the code base and from that perspective, it sounds great, by the time it's actually implemented in code, and if you work in software development, that's an expected thing. By the time it actually is implemented, it's an entirely different beast at that point. And I think you can really kind of set yourself up for some disappointment.
Yeah, definitely. And like you say, use what we have now. I mean, I now have just got to the point where all my sats are whirlpooled. They've all been through at least once, because I'm never going to send it to an exchange again anyway. So fuck all that. And it makes me feel a little bit more comfortable knowing that they've been through. But if there was something where I needed to make a payment and I did want it to be as private as possible, and if there is some atomic swap and you swap into something like Monero to make that payment more private, I don't see the issue with it, because look, I mean, when I've suggested that I would look into it, I had loads of people in the comments like, "Oh yeah, buy Monero and do this is better than Bitcoin, blah blah blah." And I'm not interested in that. I'm not really right now interested in spending a load of time to work out if it's a good investment. I'm very confident on Bitcoin being a good investment. That's where I hold my money. But if I wanted to use Monero and there was an atomic swap, I can't see the downside other than the volatility. When you actually do the swap into that, if you had some sort of volatility, it could be an issue. But I kind of see what you're saying about it's kind of like a layer 2, but it's not a layer 2, because if you're going to, from my understanding of something like Liquid, you're pegging into Liquid, which then gives you another token, which is basically, like sat per sat. So you don't have the volatility risk, but then you have other risks. You have other risks there, or you potentially could have other risks there. So I don't know.
Yeah, so the interesting thing with Liquid is without rehashing some of the stuff I've said kind of on Twitter, because there's actually kind of really no need to, obviously, with the criticisms of it being what I see as largely a custodial system, which some people would disagree with quite extensively. I think the other thing that I think is an interesting thing, that when we look at kind of adoption of these tools, for example, is a lot of people draw parallels and allegorical kind of type things. It's not very articulate, but how can I put it is, put it this way, right? We hear a lot that Bitcoin is money. and therefore, there's going to be a really, things edge towards kind of one form of money. There's a central, people who look for a single unit of account and all that. But Bitcoin isn't just money. It can be used as money, but it isn't money. It's software, and it's actually an open source software project maintained by fallible people voluntarily running it. And the other thing it is, and a lot of people try and pretend it isn't, is it's a payment network. Now, when we talk about stuff like money, and this is actually kind of worth thinking about now, is that there isn't just about the store of value, but it's also the medium of exchange. And there was a lot of criticism with someone like Roger Ver back in a few years ago when he wanted like Bitcoin to be kind of almost used like a PayPal 2.0, I think he'd said, which was kind of famously kind of, held back at him as a kind of really big criticism. And he was wrong in a lot of ways, obviously, because, if it just, it wasn't, you couldn't obviously scale blockchains to be a level that could process transactions to like Visa or something like that. But one thing he was right on in that respect, well, I don't know if he's right on, but I think one thing that it highlights is that there is a network effect anyway to payment mechanisms. And we see that in real life now. If we go abroad, for example, I'm sure this might have happened to you, well, not recently, but prior to all the COVID stuff, is that you may be in a position where you're in another country and you don't have a local currency in your pocket, but it's actually not an issue because you've got a Visa or a MasterCard or something in your back pocket, because the actual network effect of that payment mechanism is so large, is that actually like it's useful in itself. Now, the interesting thing with something like Bitcoin is that you being presented with a Bitcoin address, like a kind of cute, in the form of a QR code or similar, right? In a certain type of market, whether it's like an online market or a grey or a darknet market, those are real physical integration points that you have to deal with. So one of the things that's always going to be against Liquid is that they've actually got to get network effect. So if you're going to use it for actually kind of wanting privacy, say, you got to think, well, what am I using this for privacy from, or who? Am I going to be able to use it for spending privately? Well, probably not, because there's pretty much no uptake of Liquid at a merchant point of sale. Maybe you could use it, as the people that the proponents say, or you can use it for arbitrage. You can privately move between exchanges. Well, you can do that with Bitfinex. Don't know who else. I think there's a Hong Kong exchange. I don't think you can do it with Kraken. You can't do it with Binance. You can't do it with FTX. You can't do it with OKX, I think. So not really going to be much use. So you actually need that network effect, right? And I think one of the interesting things, with Monero, for example, is they've already beaten Bitcoin in a lot of darknet markets already as becoming the de facto payment network. So even if people are storing Bitcoin and holding Bitcoin, and that's, it's certainly not suggesting it's going to fall away because it doesn't maintain the dominant payment network effect, but the payment network effect is important as well and shouldn't be overlooked when you're looking at adoption and use of these currencies as well.
Do you see any chance of this changing? I mean, you mentioned your shop, you offer both, you offer payments in both. Do you think that this is going to happen possibly on darknet markets at any point, or do you feel now that battle is lost? Because it's a big, important...
Well, I think Monero is already on the way to winning on the darknet markets.
It sounds like it's won from everyone that I've spoken to.
So I think, the last I heard is, I think on the Russian darknet market, they're far more Bitcoin focused, and I don't think there's kind of quite the need, because I don't think they've kind of got quite the same degree of fiat on and off ramps. So the pseudonymity of Bitcoin is not such a big deal. Plus, potentially, Bitcoin's got such a large network effect. I think here, in terms of like on the merchants, I think it's going to be an interesting one, because I think even the people that are very keen with Bitcoin and obviously want to store it as a whole value, that they're also worried about exposing their stack when they go and spend at a shop or something like that. And I think some of them, we've heard in kind of podcasts before, some of them are even spending from exchanges to hide their stack because they're worried about people looking through their blockchain analytics. I think if Monero will go on the up from that perspective. I think a lot will depend though in the kind of the ClearNet type markets, like shops like mine, that there's a clear legal entity behind it. A lot of that will be affected by what requirements made on people like me to KYC our customers. So at the moment, right, like it's only really on the exchange front, although I think this is starting to change now. And it may be that when you sell products, in the same way that you receive a deposit, you've actually got to find out where that money comes from, or you've got to find out who that person is. So I think that what you could actually find, and this is for me is kind of interesting, is if I'm in a position where I'm maintaining an online store selling privacy phones for Bitcoin and Monero, but I've actually got a KYC, let's say I'm forced to do that KYC to people, then I'm not going. There's no point for me personally picking up Bitcoin or Monero. I mean, quite frankly, it's probably not an awful lot of point doing my shop at that point. No big deal. But like why have a private currency if I've got to then go and like get a load of invasive information off those individuals? Sure, it's not exactly the same, but it's in that same vein, right? And I think what will happen then is if it gets too tough, I mean, aside from the novelty factor, what you'll find is it's just easier to use like a PayPal, a Revolut, or Wise, or something like that. And then actually you just find the use of cryptocurrency like a Monero or Bitcoin actually moves in further into darknet market types, because it only becomes worth accepting something like cryptocurrency. We kind of almost come full circle when you're not doing all the other, the other kind of the activities, because otherwise we just recreate the banking system. So I do think that kind of sanity will see its way through in the end. I think we are in a bit of a transitionary period where people are kind of both doing a bit of compliance and a bit of non-state money. I think it is going to get to a position where you're just going to go, you know what, I'm going to do one or the other.
Yeah, well, it's still hard. Like, people will get annoyed with me saying that. They'll be like, oh, fucking hell, it's not that hard to use privacy software. It's not that fucking difficult. Well, it is. I find it difficult. I've probably spent, and this is not an exaggeration, about 150 to 200 hours fucking around with nodes going down, Whirlpool going down, having to reflash it all. Then my balance doesn't show and I'm shitting myself because I've put too much in because I'm trying to save on the fees and all that stuff, just constantly. I've only just got my Whirlpool up and running again now after it was down for a couple of weeks. So I just don't have time to fix it. And like, it works. It's really fucking good when it works, and I'm really, really grateful that we have it. But I am not going to be able to teach this to anyone who I've got into Bitcoin. I've tried, they don't care, and the first time that something goes down, first time that something breaks, they go, fuck this, I'm not doing it anymore. And that's just the truth at the moment. And so, I do think things will improve, but I can understand why people can't be bothered. It is a lot of work.
I agree. I think one of the things that I suppose that comes out of all of this is that the positive way of looking at this is that there's an awful lot of opportunities here for services to spring up in the middle here and solve that. And I know, I don't know if this was exactly your last podcast, but the one with Diverter on it, right? He was talking about host and all that. And, because that obviously comes from why host, I think was it. So about a week, 2 weeks ago, my host became work, and I was raging. Like, it just stopped work. Like, I couldn't log into it in the same way before. Like, so my Mastodon server that I set up went down. So my little kind of way of doing an independent Twitter, my Nextcloud went down. The backups that I had didn't really work that well. They didn't seem to kind of work. And yeah, it's enormously frustrating because you don't really want to spend the time being like a sysadmin for all your stuff. But what I will say is that I haven't kind of worked out exactly what I want to do yet. I could obviously just restore, and I'm now far better 5 years later than I was a few years ago about going through redoing a server and being up. I'll probably be up and running in no time once I get going. Although I can tell you now, one thing that hasn't stopped is my absolute raging tempo when stuff does break, and I've still got all of that really like. But I'm pretty sure. But one of the things I also discovered is that there are services out there that are doing something similar to host, but you're paying for them, and they will manage a bit more of the software that goes out. So you still host your own server, but you actually pay them to get your software. And they basically make sure that what you get is a bit more stable and you've got some support and all that. So I think a lot of this is, I think one of the things that people like us are going to go through, because we're not developers, whatever, it's learning a bit at times which service that you've gone that's a bit more in the old, science project type aspect. And it may well be I was just a bit unlucky with host and I got a bad update or something like that. And again, thankfully for me, it wasn't actually that serious. But I was also considering putting all my contacts and calendar on the next cloud instance that I set up. Thank God I didn't. But you know what I mean, right? It's you kind of get to this level where you sometimes kind of go, right, I was almost there with that one. Actually, that was a bit too rickety. But now I've done that, I actually see something a bit more similar, but I'll pay for this service. I'm willing to take a bit more ownership on this one because it's more important to me that I manage that, and I'm happy to spend the time on that. Or as a software stack, that's a bit more usable. And I think you just got to concentrate on having an end kind of goal of where you're going to be. And focusing on that, but not really worrying too much about how long it takes you to get there or how many screw ups you have, as long as they're all manageable. I think make sure you have backups of everything, and make sure that you got a backup on a hard drive, you encrypt everything, and you got preferably a backup in the cloud as well. And I think once you've kind of got that, you can't go too wrong. But if it makes you feel any better, I spent years trying to move off Gmail, and I'm still on it. I've got my own, I've got my own domain, so I'm all ready. I've even paid for premium on Proton Mail. I still haven't yet quite been ready to pull the trigger, just because so much of my life, was like 10, 15 years worth of email, where I was used to the ability to go right. Something happened on that date. Search Gmail, and of course, one of the things you get with an encrypted email inbox is not really the ability to search it. So I've got 15 years of emails and PDFs, which I've exported from Gmail using a tool. So I'm kind of almost there. But I've been still not quite ready to pull the plug. But I also know that the day I do have to, it'll probably happen when I don't want to do it, but I'm forced to. I'll have got my Google account cancelled or something like that. The moment I am forced to do it, I was almost all the way there anyway.
Yeah, it's that step-by-step approach, and yes, it's taken all these hours, but I am moving forward. It just always seems that it's one step forward, two steps back.
It does.
2 months without having Whirlpool running. I'd sat on 4 or 5 separate evenings, trying to get it working until 3-4 in the morning, until I just gave up. Finally got it working yesterday. I'd got a nice bottle of whiskey, which seemed to do the job and worked. And then I was like, yes, I fucking got it working. Not exactly how I wanted it. I've got this GUI. I've got to have the laptop open, even though I've got the node running. I've still got to do that, but it's working. Yes. And then I go to use my Spectre, and it's like, oh, none of my wallets are there anymore, and my backup isn't working, and that's the second time that's happened. So you have one little celebration, and then you think, yeah, I'm a cypherpunk, I'm fucking awesome, I can do all this stuff, and then you go, no, I'm a stupid prick, I've got no idea what I'm doing, and it's broken again.
Well, yeah, but are you being stupid, or is some of that software unreliable? And I mean, one of the things that there'll be some things you'll never know, and it could be that it's for example, I've actually just in the last few weeks just stopped running my Monero node that I had on an old MacBook Air. It's a 10-year-old MacBook Air. Been running Monero node for about 3 years. I just leave it on, screen locked, thing running in the background. And in the last, basically since the I think the network was getting DDoS or whatever for a while, it never really was quite the same. I don't know if the hard drive, the database is corrupted or whatever, but I just would come to it and just find it stopped constantly. And you get to the point you're like, right, this is getting ridiculous now. But then something like my Bitcoin node, I bought hardware for that. Because I didn't want to just, because I'd also seen what it was like to try and, I remember years ago I tried running a Raspberry Pi because I've been told on Twitter you could run a Bitcoin node, no problem on a Raspberry Pi. You can't, not really, not the old ones anyway, probably the latest ones you can. But there's a lot of people that tell you can do something, but they're not actually really trying to do it and use it day in, day out. And there's a lot of tech people, right, that will do something. They're not like us. They'll go and set something up for hours. They'll spend all their evenings and they'll set it up and they'll get it working. They'll do one transaction or whatever and go, brilliant, I've done that. Now I'm going to wipe the system and start again and do something different now. Like me and you, we don't want that. We want right, I've done it. I don't want to look at it anymore. I don't want to tinker with it. I don't want it to find at 3 o'clock in the morning it stopped working. Running and all that. Whereas, and I think we get a different experience out of it. So, I definitely did try Spectre, I'm using Sparrow Wallet a bit for my desktop needs, although I'm actually, even then, not because it's the fault of the guy of the Sparrow Wallet dev, but actually I could never connect it to the Electrum server. It was terrible for syncing. Turns out there's actually a lot of bugs in that particular Electrum server that I'm running. So actually,
Right.
pretty much all the time I'm using Samurai. So it's kind of, it's a bit like, it's a bit like, how can I put it? It's a bit, there's a difference between looking at specifications of something. Like you could be an absolute aviation geek, for example, and look at kind of specifications on how fast a plane can run and also fly, and how many G's it can pull, or whatever, and all various statistics and what the range of it is, like kind of top trumps. There's another thing if you're actually a pilot of said plane. And I think that's where you've got to be kind of ruthless with, if something's not that reliable, discard, move on to the next thing. And even if you can't get exactly what you wanted to, I don't do multi-sig anymore. I did that for a while. I've got 5 hardware wallets lying around. I don't use any of them now. Just practice
Simplify.
And discard. Massively so. And again, especially if you want friends and family to ever access your stash as well, like there's just no point doing a lot of the clever stuff.
I think so. It's just frustrating when, like I'd gone through and then labeled everything. I was like, right, I'm gonna label everything so I can't fuck up. I was like, really specific, like these coins came from here, then they went through Whirlpool, they've had, 5 mixes, blah blah blah, and I had them on the different wallets, and it was like, okay, I know where I've been and I know where I stand now. And then today I'm like, except that you don't, because nothing is fucking saved and you can't access anything and you're gonna have to start from scratch. So it's just one of those things you have to accept, and that there are these trade-offs. But it is frustrating. I do understand why people give up on it, but at the same time, it's worth the hassle, because otherwise we're fucked.
Yeah, I think the other thing, like, I'm kind of going back to one of the things I said earlier about, like, you got to mock your normie friends and some of this kind of stuff as well. Like, I had a mate that's funny enough, he's a bit of a Google Pixel fan, and
Okay.
but, as in, like, not putting any kind of Google-less OS on it, he just liked the pixels. And he was telling me, like, 2 or 3 years ago, it's great when you buy these, they give you limitless storage. I was like, not really sure if I want my stuff on Google servers. That was kind of my thing. You might want to be careful of that. No, it's fine, mate. They're not going to go anywhere. They're not going anywhere. That was kind of what I was told. And then, like, about a few months ago, they introduced their limit on on how much you can have with them. And now he's got to pay a load of money every month. And of course, he's got everything trapped on that cloud, where it's actually quite a lot of bandwidth to even get all his photos off, and he doesn't know where he's going to put it, because he's the guys who've probably forgotten how to use a hard drive and back up a hard drive and all that. He's had the convenience of Google Photos and all that. Meanwhile, he's wondering about how Google can kind of send him incredible adverts. It's like, well, you basically given all your holiday photos and and all the photos from lunchtime and brunches and dinners with your girlfriend. They've got all that. They've kind of synthesized all that information. They've got a profile on you. So now he's kind of quite trapped. And I think that's the other thing is that no matter how much frustrated you feel with your own software setup and some of the tools that we're using, which you've got to remember are really quite cutting edge at the moment, like especially when we're talking about privacy software and in Bitcoin, this is not stuff meant for masses, is just take a look at like what your mates are using as defaults when they're logging in. And I think that's the thing as well, is they're that much more exposed, right? They lose a password or something, or they get hacked, and that one password they probably use for everything else. They're suddenly they can waltz through life being absolutely fine in a lot of things, and everything crashes down. Whereas hopefully for us, one disaster like that where one service gets compromised, we're all right. If your bank gets hacked into, sure, it's inconvenient, but it's not like you then got to go back and beg the bank for your entire life savings back, because you're not keeping all your money with them. You're not keeping all your data with one person. That kind of thing. I think, that's really, you've got to remind yourself not to overdo it and stress yourself out with it, but at the same time not to get too lazy and just feel like you're in control.
Have you found that people with your site, it's Mamooshi, isn't it? Mamooshi
That's
Mobile.
It, yeah.
Have you found that sort of you've been able to get your normie friends to consider getting one of these devices?
Absolutely not. No, not
No.
even not remotely. No. And the reaction has been, "Oh, Max, I hear you run a pedo phone website."
Oh, for
That's
fuck's sake.
that's that's the attitude.
That's
Yeah,
Calvin Ayre, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. It's like, well, the other reaction I had from one former colleague is that literally the last message I had from him about a year ago is like, "What the fuck are you doing? Like, you trying to get yourself arrested?" I was like,
Oh,
mate, there's nothing like. I mean, I know Singapore's a little strict on a few things, but there's
mm,
nothing, like there's security software sold in this country. Like, I mean, it's not illegal to encrypt your stuff, but like we are looking at a mass surrender psychologically amongst a
mm,
significant chunk of the population. I mean, these are guys that are not like. I mean, they're not stupid and they're not they're fairly arrogant actually in some cases. I mean, they walk around here like they own the place, and they're in kind of management positions type in quite
mm,
what you call reputable firms, and it's quite scary how much that this kind of wish to self comply and all that. So no, not at all. Like and I mean, I've not even tried to sell it to them as well. But then what
mm,
I will do though is when as I kind of said, when one of them gets greeted with something they hate on their phone, or that, why is this happening? It's like, oh yeah, I don't get any of that. And
mm.
like how come you can listen to the Joe Rogan podcast without the adverts? Oh, I use this RSS reader and it just streams through.
Yeah.
And oh, why have I got like this banned content in that Telegram message you sent to me? Oh no, that'd be because you're using a cuck phone. So you kind of like it's the only really way you're going to get through to it on that stuff, is to kind of treat it that way. I mean, and and to be honest, I don't actually want them as customers anyway. I mean, one of the best things that has been with something like the doing the Maurici stuff is literally being able to sell to people that value what you're offering.
Mm,
In the same, so people are like craving stuff like everyone's kind of got their own kind of, I mean, like what we do like here, it's not that difficult to flash a phone. But I
mhm,
also know that the first time I did it, when I did Graphene OS, probably about 2 years ago, I think I
mhm,
spent about 4 evenings doing it.
mhm. You and me
Believe it or
both.
not. Like, so I mean, there's all these pitfalls. I think that's part of the problem. It's not the fact that the process is that difficult. There's all these pitfalls. So like one of the problems I had, right, was I couldn't, for whatever reason back then, the instructions were really bad for using like Mac. So, and I didn't have Windows, so I was like, well, the Ubuntu is apparently more reliable, so I'll do that. But I didn't have a machine to like flash with Ubuntu, so I did it in a VM. Only to find
Mhm,
out that actually USB pass-through on a VM is absolutely appalling and never really works properly for this kind of stuff. So I had that as an issue, and then I didn't really know what I was doing with like the buttons. And then you can make kind of quite easy mistakes on command line interface, on the terminal. Um, and there's all these things that can go wrong, and you get close to it and you get wrong. And like you're like, hang on, I just spent 4 nights doing something that should have been a quick thing,
mhm.
and then you're only doing it as a once only anyway.
Yeah.
So and even like when I was actually doing it regularly, like when I was first doing the copper headphones before I went onto kind of the Calyx OS ones, right? It would actually not be unusual for me to go, oh, how would I use this again? Like, because you're not necessarily doing it
Mm,
that frequently to Flash. So there's this the other thing is that like with some of this stuff, it's actually people will pay out like an extra kind of $150 wherever it is, in terms of our markup that we have on like a standard pixel, just because like like they don't want to spend the time. Like it's people, you are dealing with people who are going to value their time, and
mhm,
and I haven't got the ability to do that. And I'm personally finding, I mean, like I've run, you think I told you earlier, like I've run a Bitcoin node before. I've actually compiled it on a Raspberry Pi, but
mhm.
actually, what I use is the one from Keto Miner on the novel, because
Right.
pretty much by and large it's robust and it works. And I did some extra little funky stuff with a VPN so I can access it remotely and things like that. But I mean, I couldn't be bothered to go through all the hassle of setting up a node myself and piecing together all the hardware. And so, they people are going to find what they're interested in, they want to spend the time on, and then other
Mhm.
things where they're like, I haven't really got the bandwidth for that at the moment. I just want an out of the box solution. So
Time is money, right?
absolutely, yeah.
If I'd have known that you were doing what you were doing Before I'd started, I probably would have given up on night 3 or 4 and just ordered one. Because, the same thing. I mean, whatever it was, 40 hours or so. And, same. Couldn't do it on the Mac, couldn't find any instructions. So I was like, right, I'll get an old Linux machine. I was like, oh, no, I don't want to spend the money on that. Oh, I've got a Raspberry Pi lying around. And someone said, why don't you put Ubuntu on there? And then I was going to follow the guide that Matt Odell gave, and so I did that, and then it didn't fucking work. And Matt was like, "Oh, I've just realised you can't do that because you can't do it because it's not an ARM 64 or it's not whatever something."
I had actually a similar thing. So I had an old Raspberry Pi lying around, and if you're going to put Ubuntu on it, right? I couldn't be bothered with the command line purely. So I actually was like, how do I put it on with a GUI? So I did with Ubuntu server or whatever, and then you're like, cool, I've got that in. Now I'm going to download GNOME or whatever it's called to get the UI. And then it was all done. And my intention was to run like a work. Yes, my other PC had died, so I was going to use this as a quick one for running like Amazon workspaces, like so I could do a remote session at work and just use it off a Pi. Because it's like that's brilliant. I can just use like literally rather than using my own personal equipment, like the expensive stuff. I use something cheap for work, and it's a remote access machine anyway. And of course, because it's ARM, not Intel 86 or whatever, it didn't run.
Yeah.
So you get, but you only, unless you're actually really experienced with this stuff, you don't necessarily think through all of the next steps with all the dependencies that are going to be in place, do you? And and then you're like, in retrospect, it all felt simple, but then you're like, oh, I should have known.
You don't know what you don't know, and then you get to that point, and it's like, oh, why is this not fucking working? And then I ended up doing it because I found a walkthrough in Chinese on YouTube that was subtitled, and I did it on my Mac somehow. But honestly, like you said, if you said, oh, can you flash one again tomorrow? I'd be like, no. Can't remember how the fuck I'm doing that. And so I'd be coming to you. And so what do you put on these? Is it now graphene, or are you using Kali?
We do Calyx now. So so I mean, I actually kind of like it went through full circle. So like a lot of the Samurai kind of community guys were using graphene, and then there was kind of a bit of a Twitter fallout or whatever. And then we kind of I wrote this up on a blog post when we went to use Copperhead. And then I was actually selling devices for Copperhead, and then I fell out with Copperhead for a variety of reasons. And then what was kind of nice though is that by the time I'd actually tried Calyx, it was like, wow, this is actually the first time I'm actually using a so-called privacy phone, like something optimized that hasn't got Google, that I can actually use as my daily driver, and that actually doesn't involve. There's not like some niche device, and when I thought about it quite carefully, also the trade-offs, it wasn't like it was just doing a bunch of stuff that's the same as a Google phone. I mean, significant benefit, but then some really good usability stuff. So it was a really kind of good learning journey with the various kind of Android software distributions out there and how they all differ. And although kind of superficially they kind of look quite similar when you kind of first open it, if you were to look at those phones and flash the new OS, it's only when you're actually starting to use it on a day-to-day basis you actually start really seeing the difference between them. And so Calyx OS has been brilliant. Like because we're not paying license fees to Copperhead to sell them, because it's just an open source software project, we can lower the price a fair amount as well. And it's a really reliable platform. There's a lot more apps it will support. That's also popular with the type of users that we have. So it's actually been it's actually been really kind of quite popular in the last couple of months. And I think the other thing is I don't know if it's necessarily people are paying with Monero because of what Monero is like, but I think there's been a bit of a feedback in the Monero community. So we've found we've actually had quite a few more customers that have actually purchased with Monero recently, and I think that's kind of interesting as well, because you've potentially got people that have got some coin. They obviously want a no-fuss approach to privacy, so they're using Monero, not Bitcoin. And then they just want, something kind of, they can just fill in some details, put in like even a PO box, and they've got like a private phone they've given no information for, and and they're up and running, and it's like minimal fuss.
Yeah, I think I want to try one of these because I don't use my graphene phone as a daily driver. I shame, still use an iPhone. Bitcoin Q&A was saying that the Kali OS or whatever it's called is really good and that you can use it as a daily driver. So if I do get rid of this iPhone, then maybe that's the way to go rather than graphene.
Well, I mean, so my recommendation actually would be, I mean, like, so I'm actually using like as my two daily phones at the moment. I'm using an iPhone 10 and a Pixel
Hmm.
3a,
Hmm.
and I'm basically able to use them interchangeably. Um,
Okay.
and so I don't know what model iPhone that you're using or which
Oh,
kind of stuff you
a
to.
6 because
Oh
I'm
wow, okay,
saved. Yeah, I'm
that's great.
very
Yeah.
very tight.
Well, I've been fairly tight. I mean, like my phone's over 3 years old now, I think, and the
Yeah.
3A I got was like pretty old even when I bought it. So yeah, I mean, like it's kind of funny. I had like a customer ask me today, what case you use for the 4A. I was like, mate, I don't even have a 4A. I'm yeah, gave one
Yeah.
away for free. I don't even have one myself. But yeah, like so I think kind of one of the things is that like that I'd say with Calyx like versus something like a graphene or copperhead, right, is that just in the actual speed of the device is actually quite a lot snappier because
Hmm.
the copperhead and the graphene phones, I mean, without going into technical detail, I mean they've effectively got some kind of like what they call the Android hardening. So they do some stuff with like memory allocation and all
Hmm.
that, which is in their idea adds a load of required security to the OS. But personally speaking, like in use and all that, and in terms of what the benefit is, I think is absolutely minimal for a pretty significant performance loss.
Hmm.
And Android itself, anyway, comes with kind of quite a lot of hardening in terms of being safe to memory exploits and all that. Anyway, and you're actually getting the Android security team themselves doing that stuff. So even using like hardware that's not top of the range like a 3A actually is a pretty decent experience with Calyx OS. And the other thing is that they include this thing called Micro G, which spoofs the signature for Google. So it actually means you just get notifications from Google servers. And that's always been kind of, I think, alarmed a lot of people, the idea that there might be a bit of a kind of security issue there. But it's been implemented in a way with Calyx where it's really just only that particular program where it's allowed that kind of capability. So it's in a very
Hmm.
tightly controlled environment. What it means is that when you're using something like Proton Mail or you're using 3Mail, you're getting like instant notifications. And you're actually finding that you can also use apps that are expecting to find Google services there, and
Right.
you're not. There are no Google Play services at all on the phone, but you're not lacking that whole component there. So it wasn't unusual if you use like say Graphene or Copperhead to download like a banking app or whatever, and then the whole thing just to crap out and like not work at all. Whereas because these apps can see something they can reference in the code, then they're
Mm.
not going to just crash. So you might get some variable quality with that, but actually, I mean, by and large, I think the only thing that I've not found works absolutely fine on Calyx would be like I think like a Google Maps in terms of it tracking alongside you, because it
Right.
uses so much the analytics. But other than that, like I mean, Rocket Chat, there's been instant notifications, Proton Mail, I can use Revolut even. It's been
Hmm.
absolutely fine. So you can actually use it as a perfectly normal phone, but it's got like
Right.
none of that Google bloatware, which is just a huge benefit.
Mm. I'll have to check one of these out then, and I'll have to reach out to you because I can't be fucked to build it.
Giving it the hard sell.
Yeah, no, that
Like
sounds good.
it's yeah. I mean, seriously. I mean, there'd be no reason why you couldn't like just overwrite the phone that you got or whatever if you fancied anyway. But like the kind of thing like I suppose I really want to say there is that with something like that you don't have to go to kind of full blown Edward Snowden phone,
Hmm.
but actually it's actually a really secure device anyway.
Hmm.
And but you've actually got something you can still put a load of apps that you're going to need on a day to day basis and use, and it can it doesn't feel like kind of you having to really make a sacrifice. I think that's a big part of like what we want out of these tools. We're not looking for something with all the telemetry removed and to kind of be able to kind of move through the shadows here, right? We're just
Hmm.
looking to not like walk around with a spy in your pocket throwing out all
Mm.
this info.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I like I said to you before, I try and keep these around an hour and a half. I could sit and chat to you all day. It's been fascinating and really really good to catch up with you. I wondered if there's anything that you particularly wanted to cover that maybe we haven't, or any
No,
sort of shills or anything like that you wanted to do. But yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Really good to actually chat
look,
in person.
no, absolutely. I much appreciate your time. I think the only thing I would say in terms of kind of like last words, and there's no need for me to shill any projects or software or anything like that. I think anyone that would check out my Twitter or whatever would see anyway. But I think the kind of thing that I would kind of just caution everyone with is that whenever you're on like Twitter or Telegram, whatever, be aware that what you see are a lot of there's a lot of networks of people that are good close mates, and potentially shilling software that they've not used or they're not using on a day-to-day basis, or there's actually other kind of ulterior motives through. What I just suggest with all of this is that you give it all a try first. You kind of use it for yourself and really see, make sure you go into this with a certain problem you're looking to solve, and make sure as well that if someone tells you they can solve a problem, they can actually explain it to you in a way that you understand. Because none of this actually needs to be that complex or technical. Someone should be able to explain to you in a way, this is the benefit you're getting out from this service, and this is how much you're paying for it, and this is what you're paying for it with, and this is why we do that. You shouldn't look at any, in my kind of all my experience here, you shouldn't look at privacy software and think, wow, I look back at that and I don't understand what's going on. It must be really clever here. You need to feel that you understand. And if someone can't explain it to you, there's a good chance that actually, it's not doing really what they're saying it is. So I think, there's no, whether we're talking like Android security, the efficacy of a coin join or an altcoin or something like that, look for people that aren't trying to just sell you that. And if they are trying to sell you something, just make sure you know what you're buying.
Very good advice. Yeah, very good advice.
Well, lovely to speak to you, Max, and possibly one of your first podcasts that you've had without any accents on it at all.
Yeah, I don't know how that has happened. I'll probably find out now. My mic wasn't connected properly, or something fucking stupid. But and if you stay on the line, just when we close it out, to make sure that we have the audio. But yeah, really weird. It must be your technical abilities. You've done something in the background, because I I don't know what it is with me. It's Bitcoin Q&A now calls me magnet hands, and I think it's very fitting. Fucking anything that's near me that's electric is broken. But yeah, I've really enjoyed it. It's been really cool. And if you ever find yourself back in London, give me a shout. It'd be good to go for a drink or something.
Definitely, mate. Good to chat. All right.
All right. Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.